If we were to imagine an education system that includes non-school learning settings as a critical part of that system, so let's just imagine what that might look like. And then what are the building blocks we need to start with to realize this new system?
I think you need at least 3 building blocks. One is a theory of learning that embraces in-school learning and out-of-school learning. Then you need leadership to be able to say these words in multiple communities, and then you need resources.
There's a conspicuous absence at this meeting of any of the directors of our institutions, and I think that one of the things that we need to do before we begin to talk about, I completely agree with Natalie's comment and the others about talking to teachers and communicating with them and the schools and the community, but we need to do a better job of advocating within our own institutions about the value of what we do, because our departments are shrinking, the nature and the understandings of our departments are changing, and if we have any hope of making this impact that we're talking about, which I do, I'm optimistic too, and I'm very hopeful about, I think that we need to be having this kind of conversation with our executive directors or our museum directors in the same room, and them being part of this conversation as well. Otherwise, I think, you know, we're going to continue to spin our wheels.
My dream is that our new mayor would decide that he had this big idea that museums and schools were going to play together in this city, and that he put together a civic task force that had the museum directors and had civic leaders and business leaders and people from the school system and teachers and museum educators, and their task was to come up with a sort of pilot project and a longer term plan for how to make this happen. And he set a goal that in 10 years we were going to have figured it out as a city.
So kind of to piggyback off that and what you were saying earlier about, you know, black and brown children are walking through the museum just looking, there's no form, there's no meeting with an educator. I think my question is, so even when there is a meeting with an educator, we live in a city where there is just a huge amount of de facto segregation. And whether we choose it to be or not, our museums are often maybe the only place where classrooms of white children from the north side are interacting with classrooms of African American or Hispanic children from the south and west sides. So my question is, how can we take advantage of that? How can we make our museums places of cultural literacy and real cultural centers where they're not just walking past each other, they're interacting in some sort of meaningful way that adds to that educational experience? And maybe it's just my perception, but I don't feel like that's a goal, and I don't feel like that's a priority, and I would like it to be.
But I want to hear from everyone here, and panelists included, why we can't create a museum that acts as a community center. You know, I think we talk about how valuable the things that happen in museums are, not just the learning and the connections to their academics, but also the social connections they can make with other communities they may not be exposed to. Also the family experiences and bonding that can happen, the time that they get with their families that they might not get elsewise. So there's a lot going on in museums, and I'd like to see them framed as a community center, not as partnering with community centers, but actually being one.
So I want to be on your team because I love this picture that's emerging, and I love also Nancy and also Lisa. We have pictures. We should understand them better of what that looks like. I'll speak as an organization that has done traveling exhibits with non-traditional venues, libraries, Navy Pier, the Garfield Park Conservatory, airports, you know, all places, you know, because I kind of, for project exploration, what we want to think about is like, who's at Toys R Us, right? Who's going to Toys R Us? How can we be as available as Toys R Us might be? What does that look like? And I can show you, I can kind of describe some of the pictures that we see when we're in those kinds of spaces. It's the young boy who's tired at night. It's families who are coming and having exhibits in English and Spanish in a library. They're coming after hours. What's happening at the library? The librarians are going to have to help me. When you sign up for a card, there's a word for that. Help me out, librarians.
Passport?
Yeah, no, you know, when you sign up for a card, the number of people signing up for cards is going up. That's a, yes, we'll think of it. You know what it is? Anyway, right, patrons. So patrons are going through the roof. What's happening? Repeat visits, because it's free. It's something they enjoy, they can come back to. Yes, it's in English and Spanish. Yes, there's teacher resources on the website. At the Garfield Park Conservatory, when we were there for 5 months, they had more young people walk through that space than when it opened in 1902. But part of it is being really intentional about equipping teachers to have what they need, to have that workshop be free for them, to have those materials to be available, to think about working with parents. So there are lots of ways to do that, but what we see is different demographics, repeat visit, and also, I think, young people finding ways where they're having the informal conversations that you mentioned, where the learning is happening. That's the robust picture of education that we might envision, where learning is happening through relationships, it's interest-driven, it's guided by caring adults, but it's in these incredibly rich, resourced learning environments that people can't generally have in their own private houses.